So how do we know that what we're reading in our English Bibles today is what was originally written in Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic? In 2 Timothy 3:16, it says, "All scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work." But what if the Bible was originally inspired, but the claim that we've heard is that, well, what we're reading today is just translations of translations. So maybe it started in Greek and maybe that was inspired, but after it was translated into Egyptian and then into German or Latin and then German, and then after many different iterations and translations, now we have it in English. Or is it like the telephone game where you whisper something into somebody's ear and then they whisper it into somebody's ear and you never hear what's passed on. And by the time it gets to the end of that chain, it's something vastly different than what it started with. And when you think of the Bible, well, we have copies of copies of copies of copies of copies over 2,000 years. Certainly you would think that what we have today is very different from what was originally written. Well, is that true? Can we know? Well, yes, actually we can. The idea of the telephone game is that you're whispering something into someone's ear and then you don't hear what's passed on. That would be something like me making a copy of the Bible and then burning the original so that there's no access to the original. But the fact is, we know we don't have the original manuscripts, but we have manuscripts going back very, very far. And so we can actually test the claim, is what we have today what was originally written or what we had from 2,000 years ago, or has it been changed? Because we have something like the Dead Sea Scrolls. That was written even before the time of Jesus. It was discovered in the late 1940s, early 1950s, and it was full copies of the scroll of Isaiah and many of the other Old Testament books. And so we can look at, before the time of Jesus, is the scroll of Isaiah the same as we now have in our book of Isaiah, an English translation of the Hebrew? 2,000 years later, we can test that claim, and we can see that it's something like 96% exactly the same, and most of the changes are just tiny things like punctuation and things that change over time in the Hebrew, nothing that really affects any of the meaning of it. And the manuscripts in the New Testament, we go back to very close to when the originals were written. The oldest we have is called P52. It's a little piece of papyrus that is a piece of John chapter 17, and it goes back to about 125 AD. And John was probably written in the 90s AD. So this is just 30 years later. And we could take this little piece of John 17, compare it to the Greek that we have today that we translate into the English and say, well, did it change? The answer is no, it did not. So not only do we have the Dead Sea Scrolls that confirm the accuracy of transmission and translation of the Old Testament, we also have ancient New Testament documents, thousands of them, that were spread all over the region, from Spain to Turkey to Egypt to southern Israel, and like the whole region, Asia Minor. They spread all over the place. No one person controlled all of the manuscripts. And so we can look at those thousands of manuscripts, compare them to what they have today, and say, well, were they changed over time? Or can we be confident that what we're reading is very much like the originals? And three books, they call them, the Bible was written on different surfaces. One was papyrus, which was plant-based. The other was vellum, which is basically sheepskin or parchment. And we have codexes. Codexes are just what we would in the modern day called books. And three codexes. Codex Sinaiticus was discovered in Egypt, right near Mount Sinai in St. Catherine's Monastery. Codex Vaticanus, which comes from Rome, and Codex Alexandrinus, which is also probably in Egypt. Both Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus are full, almost complete copies of the Old and New Testaments of the Bible. Codex Alexandrinus, and those were in the 300s, early 300s AD they came from. And so we can compare those to what we have today. And Codex Alexandrinus also came in Egypt, from a different area in Egypt than Codex Sinaiticus, and that was early 400s AD. So we have 1,600 years, if it's true, that the Bible has been changed, like copy after copy after copy. We would see in these very old books of the Bible that have the complete, at least the complete New Testament, we would see these changes having accumulated, and we don't see that. We see that what we have today is very accurate. And if it wasn't, we'd have thousands of manuscripts to correct anything that's a little different. And so we can have full confidence that we don't have copies of copies, that the Bible wasn't a telephone game, that we take the Greek and we translate it directly into the English of what we have today. It's one translation, Greek to English in the New Testament, or Hebrew or Aramaic into English in the Old Testament. And so we can be confident that what we have today is not copies of copies, but it is what God originally intended.